YouTube, what is up? It's BZ, and today we are going through some pretty fat nerfs that Unholy is seeing with the class tuning coming on Tuesday for 12.0.5. Now, before you freak out after seeing the percentages of these nerfs and reroll a Ret Paladin or something, let's go through the numbers first. This might not be as bad as it looks. Okay, so starting off with Frost, you guys just get a 5% damage increase, but unfortunately Frost is so far behind that this doesn't really make up for anything. Very behind in Raid, very behind in M+. It's one of the least played specs in M+. And in terms of Raid, it does some middling damage, but it's nowhere up top near Unholy or Frost Mage or Devourer or Survival Hunter. So this 5% will help, but honestly not enough to make it viable. All right, let's dive into the unholy changes. So they're changing us again because it's performing better than intended after recent bug fixes caused by the 12.05 change. So we were absolutely blasting. So we're getting that nerf stick, unfortunately. Let's start with the changes. We're seeing Magus of the Dead, Shadow Bolt damage reduced by 15%. This one actually hurts a lot. Graveyard damage reduced by 15%. So our rune expender, we're losing some of that as we were pressing that at 4 to 5 targets or more, and just seeing each individual cast running anywhere between like 300 to 400,000 damage per button press in some of these higher keys. Like, that was a little ridiculous. So I see why they nerfed that. And then lastly, I think the biggest decrease to our overall damage with these changes is going to be Rider of the Apocalypse changes. So we're seeing both White Mane and Trollbane's casts reduced by 25%. So let's actually dive into a log so you can see exactly how much this will be affecting our damage. So for context, this log is the number one US DKs plus 22 in Nexus Point. I figured that was as good a log as any to illustrate how much damage you probably should be dealing with these abilities and how much of a decrease after nerf this leads to for our overall. All right, let's dive into the changes that are being made. So very first, Rider's Champion. This is usually most of our damage, sitting at 14% or so here. And this is made up by, all of the different casts that our summons do when you press Army of the Dead. Now, Epidemic and Trollbane's Icy Fury, you can see, are the top damage dealing abilities. So both of these individually are getting nerfed by 25%. We're not just taking Rider's Champion damage and lopping 25% off of that. We're taking 25% off of two of maybe 8 or 9 different abilities that are factored underneath Rider's Champion. So we are seeing a 25% decrease on both Epidemic and Icy Fury, which make up around 50% of our total, overall Riders Champion damage. When we get rid of 25% of both of these individually, we are seeing roughly 4.2, 4.5 million in overall damage loss. So not as significant as you might think. Our overall damage here is dropping from 51 to 46.8 million. Now let's take a look at Army of the Damned. This is probably the most significant individual impact to our damage. Our Maguses are casting a lot. You can see that they are casting over Shadow Bolt over 2,000 times throughout a dungeon, right? And those 2,000 casts are making up around 43 million damage, while their Frostbolt cast only makes up around 5 million. So hitting the Shadow Bolt damage with a 15% nerf actually does kind of hurt. So Army of the Damned throughout this entire dungeon, if we toss that 15% in there, that would be dropping down to around 36 million in Shadow Bolt damage. So we're seeing roughly like 7 million in damage loss here, dropping down to like 42-ish million instead of what it's showing is 48 million here. And then lastly, we have just a standard flat 15% damage nerf to Graveyard. So dealing around 39 million throughout a dungeon, hit with the 15%, we're going to see that closer to 33 million. Now, what does this mean for our overall damage and DPS? Well, you can see down here, we have a total of 368 million damage dealt across an entire dungeon. That equated to around 211,000 in DPS overall. With those nerfs, this damage overall goes from 367.5 million to 351.1 million. So we're losing roughly 16 million in overall damage across the dungeon at very top performance. And that comes out to around a 4 to 5% DPS or overall damage decrease. And in terms of AoE specifically, we're seeing around an 8% DPS loss. So really, we're not losing that much damage overall. The 4 to 5% DPS nerf hurts, but we are so far above other classes that it honestly doesn't matter. In raid, we'll still be doing very acceptable damage. And in M plus, we are going to be, I mean, still by far and away the best DPS spec in the game. And when we look at M plus damage, let's be honest, we haven't had a hard time doing more than 4 to 5% than every other class that we play with. In my runs, I'm usually gapping the next DPS and overall by 15 to 20 to sometimes 30k. Overall, hitting around like 190 to 200k overall throughout a dungeon. We're gonna be fine. Unholy is still by far and away the best DPS spec in M+. So if that's what you enjoy playing, you are going to still feel great. Now, for changes, the only thing this might actually affect is our choice node here between a Fury of the Horseman and Feast of Souls. Right, so we are seeing nerfs to our summoned horseman's raw damage, right? So this makes Feast of Souls potentially more attractive since it buffs your direct damage rather than your summoned horseman's automated damage. Now, we don't know if this is going to be the case or if it'll sim higher. I think right now most people are preferring to play with Fury of the Horseman, but it could be worth testing now that we're seeing a little bit more of a nerf to our Rider's Champion and Epidemic and Icy Fury from our Horseman. But that's pretty much it for DK. And honestly, come Tuesday, assuming nothing else breaks and we don't have any more bug issues, we should still be sitting at the top of the charts, gapping other DPS as the best DPS class in the game for M+. But thanks for watching, and I hope everybody gets a Myth Raid Trinket in Vault on Tuesday.